I need you to understand something before I tell you this story. I was never the type to make waves. I showed up early, stayed late, smiled through every impossible deadline, and never once complained when my male colleagues got promoted over me. For 6 years, I was the perfect employee at Morrison and Associates, a mid-sized marketing firm in downtown Seattle. And for 6 years, I watched less qualified people climb the ladder while I stayed stuck on the same rung, making $58,000 a year while doing the work of 3 people. But I kept my head down because I needed this job. Single mom, 8-year-old daughter, rent in Seattle that'll make you cry into your instant ramen. You know the drill. The day everything changed started like any other Tuesday. I was at my desk by 7:30, already 3 coffee cups deep, working on the Henderson account that nobody else wanted to touch because the client was notoriously difficult. My boss, Richard Morrison, the founding partner's son who got his position through nepotism rather than talent, walked past my cubicle at 8:15. He did this thing where he'd slow down, glance at my screen, and keep walking without saying anything. It was his way of reminding us he was watching. Always watching. Around 10, his assistant Brenda, this sweet woman in her 50s who always smelled like vanilla and brought homemade cookies on Fridays, stopped by my desk. She had this weird look on her face, somewhere between pity and concern. She told me Richard wanted to see me in his office at 11. My stomach dropped. In 6 years, I'd been called into his office exactly 3 times. Once when I started, once for a performance review that resulted in a pathetic 2% raise, and once when he kissed me of leaving the coffee maker on overnight, which I hadn't. So yeah, being summoned to Richard's office was never good news that I spent the next 45 minutes spiraling. Had I messed up the Henderson account? Was I getting fired? Did someone complain about me? I ran through every possible scenario, each one worse than the last. My friend Jessica from accounting noticed me freaking out and asked if I was okay. I told her about the meeting and she made this face, you know, the one where someone knows something but isn't supposed to say anything. She squeezed my shoulder and said to be careful. What the hell did that mean? At exactly 11, I knocked on Richard's door. He called me in with this cheerful tone that immediately set off alarm bells. Richard was never cheerful. The man had 2 settings, condescending and angry. His office was exactly what you'd expect from someone whose daddy bought him a corner office he didn't earn. Dark wood furniture, leather chairs that probably cost more than my car, diplomas from schools he'd barely passed through, photos of him golfing with clients, and this massive window overlooking the city that I'm convinced he spent more time staring out of than actually working. He told me to sit down, which I did, perching on the edge of one of those stupidly expensive leather chairs. He was behind his desk, leaning back in his executive throne, fingers steepled like he was some kind of movie villain. He started with small talk, asking about my daughter Emma, how she was doing in school, whether she still played soccer. This was weird because Richard had never asked about Emma before. I'm not even sure he knew I had a daughter until that moment, despite me mentioning her approximately 1 million times over the years. Then, he transitioned into talking about my work performance. He said I'd been doing excellent work, really exceptional, particularly on the Henderson account. He said the client had specifically praised my work, called me a miracle worker. My heart started to lift a little. Maybe this was good news. Maybe I was finally getting that promotion I'd been passed over for 3 times. Maybe all those late nights and missed soccer games were finally paying off. Richard stood up and walked around his desk, which should have been my first real warning sign. He perched on the edge of his desk, way too close to my chair, invading my personal space in that way men do when they think they're being casual, but are actually being predatory. He told me he'd been thinking about my compensation. He said I was clearly underpaid for the value it brought to the company. He mentioned that market rate for someone with my skills and experience was probably in the 70 to 75,000 range. I was making 58. The difference would be life-changing for me and Emma. I remember getting excited, actually excited, thinking this was it. Finally, recognition, fair pay, the ability to maybe not live paycheck to paycheck for once. Maybe I could even take Emma on a real vacation, not just a weekend at my mom's place. Richard smiled at me, but it wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a shark that spotted blood in the water. He said he'd been reviewing the budget, and there was definitely room to give me that raise. $15,000 a year. Can you imagine? That's $1,250 a month before taxes. That's groceries without anxiety. That's the ability to fix my car when it inevitably breaks down again. That's Emma's college fund actually having something in it. But then came the pause. You know that pause, the one that comes before everything goes to hell. Richard said the raise would need to be justified to the other partners. He said they'd need a good reason to approve such a significant increase, especially in the current economic climate. He talked about optics and precedent and budget constraints, all this corporate nonsense that I'd heard 100 times before whenever someone asked for what they deserved. I started toadflate, realizing this was just another dead end, Another empty promise. Then he said there might be a way to make it work. He said he had significant influence with the other partners, that he could push it through without much difficulty if he really wanted to. My stupid, naive brain thought he was building up to asking me to take on more work or responsibilities. Maybe lead a team, manage some accounts, mentor junior employees. I would have said yes, Tony of it. I was so desperate for that money, for that validation, for the chance to give my daughter a better life. Instead, Richard said he'd be willing to push hard for my raise if I was willing to show some appreciation. He let that word hang in the air for a second. Appreciation. I asked what he meant, even though some part of me was already starting to understand, was already feeling sick. He leaned in closer, close enough that I could smell his cologne, some expensive brand that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. He said we could work out an arrangement that would be mutually beneficial. He said I was an attractive woman, that he'd noticed me for a while, that we could keep things discreet. I remember my brain kind of short-circuiting. Did my boss, this married man with 3 kids whose family photos were literally visible from where I was sitting, just suggest what I thought he suggested? He must have seen the shock on my face because he quickly added that this was completely my choice. No pressure, but opportunities like this didn't come around often. He said if I wasn't interested, he completely understood, but he couldn't guarantee when another budget review might happen. Maybe not for another year or 2. He shrugged, like he was talking about lunch options instead of propositioning his employee. I stood up so fast, I almost knocked over the chair. I told him I needed to think about it, which was the stupidest thing I could have said because I wasn't going to think about it. I was going to absolutely not do it, but my brain was in shock and I couldn't form proper words. He smiled again, that same shark smile, and told me to take all the time I needed. He said his door was always open if I wanted to discuss it further. He actually winked at me. This man winked at me after basically offering to exchange money for sexual favors. I got out of his office and somehow made it to the bathroom before I threw up. I was shaking so hard I could barely stand. Jessica found me there about 10 minutes later, sitting on the floor of a bathroom stall, trying to breathe properly. She helped me up, got me some water, asked what happened. I couldn't tell her. How do you say those words out loud? How do you explain that your boss just offered you a raise in exchange for sleeping with him? I went home early, told them I had food poisoning, which wasn't entirely a lie since I had actually thrown up. I picked up Emma from school and tried to act normal, try to help with her homework and make dinner and do bath time like it was any other day. But I kept thinking about Richard's offer. The worst part, the absolute worst part that I'm ashamed to even admit, is that for about 5 minutes I actually considered it, not because I wanted to. God, not because I wanted anything to do with that man. But because $15,000 is a lot of money when you're broke. It's a lot of money when your daughter needs new shoes, but you're choosing between that and paying the electricity bill. It's a lot of money when you're one car repair away from financial disaster. For 5 minutes, I understood how women end up in these situations, how desperation makes you consider things you never thought you'd consider. But then Emma asked me to read her a bedtime story, this book about a princess who saves herself instead of waiting for aprons, and I thought about what kind of example I'd be setting. What kind of person I'd be teaching her to become. And I knew I couldn't do it. Not for $15,000, not for $100,000, not for any amount of money. The next day, I went to HR. Our HR director was this woman named Patricia Chun who always seemed competent and professional. I'd never had a reason to interact with her much, but I'd heard she took complaints seriously. I scheduled a meeting and went in with everything written down because I was afraid I'd forget details or chicken out. Patricia listened to everything, took notes, asked clarifying questions. She seemed appropriately shocked and concerned. She assured me this was completely unacceptable behavior and that the company had zero tolerance for sexual harassment. She said she'd need to investigate, which would involve interviewing Richard and possibly other employees. She asked if I'd be comfortable with that. I said yes, even though I wasn't comfortable with any of it. The next week was hell. Richard acted like nothing had happened, was actually friendlier than usual, asking how I was doing, commenting on my work. It was gaslighting in real time. I started documenting everything, every interaction, keeping detailed notes with timestamps. Jessica told me people were talking, rumors were spreading. Someone had seen me going into HR, someone else had noticed Richard being weird around me. The gossip mill was churning. Patricia called me back in after 10 days. She said she'd completed her investigation. She'd interviewed Richard, who completely denied everything. He said our meeting was a standard performance review, that he'd mentioned the possibility of a raise based on merit, and that I must have misunderstood something he said. He suggested I might be stressed or confused. He actually used those words. Patricia said she'd also interviewed his assistant Brenda, who confirmed I'd been in his office for approximately 20 minutes, but obviously couldn't confirm what was said. I felt my heart sinking. This was going exactly where I knew it would go. Patricia said that without additional evidence or witnesses, it was essentially my word against Richard's. She said they took all harassment claims seriously, but they needed to be fair to everyone involved. She said they couldn't take action based solely on one uncorroborated allegation. She encouraged me to come forward immediately if any other incidents occurred. I asked what happened now. She said nothing would happen now. Richard would receive a verbal reminder about appropriate workplace behavior, and I should feel comfortable knowing I'd done the right thing by reporting. I asked about the raise, about whether I'd still be considered for one based on my actual performance. Patricia got this uncomfortable look and said that compensation decisions were outside her department, but she'd note my concerns, and I went back to my desk and cried. Quietly, so no one would see, but I cried. I'd done everything right, followed every proper channel, and it meant nothing. Less than nothing, because now I'd painted a target on my back. I knew how this worked. I'd seen it happen to other women. You complain, nothing happens to the man, and suddenly you're the problem employee. Your projects get reassigned, your reviews get worse, you get excluded from meetings and opportunities until eventually you quit or they find Area Sun to fire you. Sure enough, things started changing. The Henderson account, the one Richard had praised me for, got reassigned to Mark, a guy who had been here for 3 years and had a fraction of my experience. Richard said it was because I seemed overwhelmed and he wanted to lighten my load. My invitation to the weekly strategy meetings disappeared. I asked about it and was told they were trying a smaller group to make meetings more efficient. My name wasn't on the list for the big industry conference in March, even though I'd gone the past 3 years. Budget cuts. They said that I started applying for other jobs, but the market was terrible. I'd been at Morrison for 6 years, which apparently made me look either incompetent for not advancing or too specialized in our specific approach. I had interviews but no offers. I was either overqualified or underqualified, too expensive or not experienced enough in whatever specific thing they needed. Meanwhile, my savings were running out and Emma needed new glasses and the landlord was raising the rent. Jessica told me I should talk to a lawyer, but lawyers cost money I didn't have. I looked into it anyway, found some that did free consultations. They all said the same thing, that I had a case but it would be difficult to prove without evidence, that these things often came down to credibility, and that litigation would be expensive and time-consuming. One lawyer was honest enough to tell me that even if I won, the settlement would probably be less than what I'd spend in legal fees and lost wages while looking for a new job. 2 months after the HR meeting, my review came up. Richard gave me an overall rating of needs improvement. Me, who'd been exceeding expectations for 6 years, who'd saved the Henderson account, who regularly stayed late and came in early, has cited missed deadlines that were someone else's fault, communication issues that never happened, and a general concern about me attitude and teamwork. It was all vague enough to sound legitimate while being specific enough to go in my permanent file that I knew what was happening. They were building a case to fire me, document enough performance issues, and they could let me go without it looking like retaliation. It's a classic move, happens all the time, and it's completely legal as long as they document it properly. I started recording everything, saving every email, documenting every conversation. I wasn't going down without a fight. Even if I knew the fight was probably futile, then something unexpected happened. Do you remember when I mentioned Brenda, Richard's assistant? Sweet Brenda, who brought cookies and always had a kind word for everyone? She asked if we could have coffee after work one day. I almost said no because I was paranoid about everything by that point, but something in her voice made me say yes. We met at this coffee shop 3 blocks from the office, far enough that we wouldn't run into coworkers. Brenda ordered a chamomile tea and sat across from me looking nervous as hell. She apologized for not saying anything during the HR investigation. She said she'd been scared of losing her job, that she needed her health insurance because her husband had cancer and the treatments were expensive. I understood that. I couldn't even be angry about it because I understood that completely. Then she told me I wasn't the first. She said Richard had done this before, at least 3 times that she knew of. One woman had quit suddenly 2 years ago, another had transferred to the San Francisco office, and a third had been fired for performance issues after rejecting him. Brenda said she'd kept her mouth shut because she couldn't afford to lose her job, but she couldn't watch it happen again. She couldn't watch another woman get destroyed for refusing to sleep with the boss. I asked if she'd testify to this, make a formal statement. She said she couldn't, not officially, because she'd lose her job and her insurance, and her husband would lose his cancer treatment. But she said she'd accidentally printed out some of Richard's emails to his personal account, emails that he'd stupidly sent from his work computer. She slid a manila folder across the table. Inside were printouts of emails to 3 different women, all of them inappropriate, some of them explicitly soliciting sexual favors in exchange for raises or promotions. He'd been careful not to be too explicit, but the implication was clear in all of them. She also gave me a USB drive. She said Richard kept a calendar on his computer with personal appointments, and she'd noticed he'd been regularly meeting with someone named MK at hotels during work hours for the past 6 months. One of the women in the emails was Maria Kowalski, a junior account executive who'd gotten a promotion 6 months ago. Brenda had copies of hotel receipts that Richard had submitted for reimbursement, claiming they were client meetings. They weren't. The company credit card statements showed room service charges, minibar charges, all during the middle of the workday. I asked Brenda why she was doing this. She got tears in her eyes and said because it was the right thing to do, even if she couldn't do it publicly. She said her daughter was about to graduate college and enter the workforce, and she couldn't stand the idea of some man treating her the way Richard treated us. She said she was sorry it took her so long, that she was a coward, but maybe this would help. Then she left, telling me to wait 10 minutes before leaving so we wouldn't be seen together. I sat in that coffee shop for an hour, looking at those emails, that evidence, feeling like I was holding dynamite. This was it. This was what I needed. But I also knew that using it meant burning everything down, probably including my own career. If I went back to HR with this, there'd be a real investigation, probably involving lawyers and the board of directors. Richard would know Brenda had helped me, and she'd lose her job and her insurance. Maria Kowalski and the other women would be exposed. It would be a whole thing, a massive, messy thing, but I thought about Emma, about what I wanted to teach her. I thought about the next woman who'd sit in Richard's office and get offered that same devil's deal. I thought about how many women had left this company, how many had been silenced, how many had been forced to choose between their dignity and their paycheck. And I decided to detonate the dynamite. I didn't go back to HR. I knew Patricia would just bury it or handle it in a way that protected the company. Instead, I made copies of everything, sent one set to my personal email, put another set in a safety deposit box, and kept the originals. Then I found a lawyer, a woman named Sarah Kim, who specialized in employment discrimination and sexual harassment. She did a free consultation, and when I showed her what I had, her eyes lit up. Sarah said this was a slam dunk case. Multiple victims, documentary evidence, a pattern of behavior, retaliation. She said she'd take it on contingency, meaning she'd get paid when I got paid. She said we could sue Richard personally and the company for creating a hostile work environment and failing to properly investigate harassment claims. She estimated the settlement could be substantial, possibly 6 figures depending on how much the company wanted to avoid public litigation, but she warned me it would get ugly. My name would be in court documents. Richard's lawyers would try to destroy my credibility, dig into my personal life, find anything they could use against me. The other women would have to be contacted, scheduled to testify, and they might not want to relive their experiences. The whole thing would take months, possibly years. And there was always the chance, however small, that we could lose did I told her to do it. We filed the lawsuit on a Friday afternoon, which apparently is strategic timing because it gives the company all weekend to panic before they can respond. Sarah sent copies to the local news outlets because she said sunshine was the best disinfectant and companies settled faster when facing public scrutiny. BY Monday morning, it was all over the local news. Marketing firm executive accused of sexual harassment, serial predator in corner office, pattern of abuse at Morrison and Associates. My phone was blowing up with calls from reporters, from former colleagues, from people I hadn't talked to in years. The firm's parking lot had news vans camped out. I didn't go to work that Monday. Sarah had advised me not to, said they'd probably put me on administrative leave anyway. Sure enough, I got a call from Patricia at 8 in the morning, telling me I was on paid leave pending the outcome of an investigation. She sounded stressed out of her mind. I almost felt bad for her. But then I remembered how she dismissed my initial complaint. The firm released a statement saying they took all allegations seriously and were conducting a thorough investigation. Standard corporate nonsense. But behind the scenes, according to Jessica, who was keeping me updated, everything was chaos. Richard had been put on leave. The other partners were in emergency meetings. People were being interviewed by outside investigators. The firm's biggest clients were calling, concerned about the publicity. Maria Kowalski called me. She was crying. She said she appreciated what I was doing, but asked if there was any way her name could be kept out of it. She said she didn't want to be known as the woman who slept with her boss, even though she felt like she hadn't had a choice. She said her fiancé didn't know, and finding out would destroy their relationship. I told her I understood, that Sarah would do everything possible to keep her name confidential, but I couldn't guarantee anything. She said she'd have to think about whether she could testify. I got it. I completely got it. Not everyone can be a martyr, and I wasn't going to judge her for protecting herself. The other 2 women from Brenda's emails couldn't be reached. One had moved out of state and changed her phone number. The other one answered but hung up as soon as I said Richard's name. Trauma does that. It makes you want to forget, to move in, to pretend it never happened. Some wounds you just want to let scar over, not rip them open again for the sake of justice or vengeance, or whatever you want to call it. 3 weeks after filing the lawsuit, Morrison and Associates lawyers reached out to Sarah about a settlement. She said this was expected, that companies almost always try to settle before discovery, before they have to turn over internal documents and emails and all the dirty laundry they want to keep hidden. The initial offer was insulting, something like $40,000 and an NDA. Sarah laughed in their face. Metaphorically speaking, we countered with $350,000, Richard's termination, policy changes, and mandatory harassment training for all employees. They said no way, came back with $75,000. We said $300,000. They said $100,000. This went on for weeks, this weird negotiation dance where they were basically putting a price tag on Richard's behavior and my suffering. During all this, my life was falling apart in slow motion. I was still on paid leave, which was good because I still had income, but I was going stir-crazy at home. Emma kept asking why I wasn't at work, whether I was fired, whether we were going to be okay. I tried to explain it in 8-year-old terms, that I'd stood up to someone who was being mean, and now we had to wait to see what happened. She asked if I was scared. I lied and said no. The internet found out about the case because of course it did. There were entire Reddit threads dissecting every detail, people taking sides, people calling me a liar and a gold digger, and worse. There were also people supporting me, sharing their own stories, saying I was brave. The attention was overwhelming. I deleted my social media accounts and tried to ignore it, but you can't really ignore the internet when it decides to focus on you. Brenda got fired. They claimed it was part of a restructuring, but everyone knew why. She called me crying, apologizing, saying she shouldn't have helped me. I felt horrible. This woman who'd done the right thing, who'd risked everything to help me, lost her job and her insurance right when her husband needed it most. I sent her money. Not that I had much to send, but I could not dosomething. She refused to take it at first, but I insisted. It was the least I could do. Richard hired a PR firm and started his own media campaign. He gave an interview to some sympathetic outlet claiming he was the victim of a disgruntled employee making false accusations to extort money. He said his marriage was suffering, his reputation was ruined, his kids were being bullied at school. He painted himself as the real victim in all this. Some people believed him. Enough people that I started getting hate mail at my apartment, which was terrifying. Jessica told me the firm was hemorrhaging clients. 3 major accounts had left, citing concerns about the company's culture and management. Recruiting was impossible because what talented person wants to work somewhere that's been all over the news for sexual harassment? The firm was bleeding money and the other partners were furious at Richard for creating this situation. 4 months after filing the lawsuit, we settled. The final amount was $240,000 before legal fees and taxes. Sarah took her contingency fee, which was standard and fair. After taxes, I ended up with about $125,000. It was enough to pay off my credit card debt, fix my car, build an emergency fund, and put some money away for Emma's college. It wasn't life-changing money, but it was life-stabilizing money. For the first time in years, I could breathe. The settlement included Richard's termination, though they let him resign to save face. He had to give up his equity in the firm and agree to never work in a management position again, though good luck enforcing that. The firm had to implement new harassment policies, create an independent reporting system, and conduct annual training. Whether they actually followed through or just did the minimum to satisfy the settlement, I don't know. The NDA was the hardest part. I had to agree not to talk about the specific details of the settlement or Richard's behavior publicly. This story I'm telling you now, I can do because enough time has passed and I'm being vague enough about identifying details. But for years, I couldn't talk about it, couldn't even tell my full story. That silence was its own kind of prison that I never went back to Morrison and Associates. They offered me my job back as part of the settlement, but Sarah advised against it and I agreed. You can't go back after something like that. Everyone would know I was the woman who sued, and I'd spend every day being either pitted or resented. Better to start fresh somewhere else. Finding a new job was hard. A simple Google search of my name brought up all the news stories. Some employers saw it as a red flag, like I was litigious or would cause problems. Others were sympathetic, but concerned about the publicity. I finally found a position at a smaller firm that actually valued my experience and didn't care about the lawsuit. The pay was decent, the culture seemed better, and my boss was a woman, which shouldn't matter but somehow made me feel safer. Emma and I moved to a better apartment. Nothing fancy, but in a better neighborhood with better schools. I could afford to put hair in activities, not just the free ones. We could go out to dinner occasionally, without me calculating the cost of every item on the menu. We took a real vacation, flew to Disneyland for a week, and it was magical watching her experience that without the constant anxiety of money hanging over us, but the trauma stuck around. I found myself constantly on guard at work, interpreting every interaction through the lens of what happened with Richard. If my new boss asked to meet with me, I'd feel that old panic rising. If a male colleague complimented my work, I'd wonder what he wanted. I started therapy, which I could finally afford, and the therapist said I had PTSD from the experience. Apparently, that's common for people who go through workplace harassment, especially when it involves power dynamics and retaliation. I thought about Brenda a lot. She'd sacrificed so much to help me and got nothing but fired for her trouble. I tried to help where I could, connecting her with recruiters, giving references, sending money when I could spare it. She eventually found a new job with better pay and benefits. Her husband went into remission. She told me once that she didn't regret helping me, that she'd do it again, but I could hear the weariness in her voice. Doing the right thing had cost her a lot. Maria Kowalski ended up leaving Morrison too, though I heard she got a generous severance as part of the settlement negotiations. She moved to a different city, started over, married her fiancé. I hope she found peace. I hope she doesn't think about Richard anymore, doesn't wonder if she could have done something differently, doesn't carry the weight of it the way I do. The other women from Brenda's emails, I never found out what happened to them. They disappeared into their new lives, their new identities, leaving behind whatever happened at Morrison. Maybe that's healthier, to just move on and forget. But I couldn't forget. Every detail is burned into my memory. The look on Richard's face when he made his proposal, the feeling of betrayal when HR dismissed my complaint, the terror of waiting to see if my lawsuit would work or if I'd just destroyed my career for nothing. Richard, as far as I know, is doing fine. I heard through the grapevine that he started consulting, helping small companies with their marketing strategies. He's probably charming some new set of clients, attending industry events, pretending to be a respectable businessman. The settlement didn't allow for criminal charges because what he did, as disgusting as it was, wasn't technically legal the way he did it. He was careful, always just on the right side of the line, always maintaining deniability. Sometimes I wonder if it was worth it if I should have just found another job quietly and moved on with my life. The lawsuit consumed 2 years of my life, cost me friendships and peace of mind, and left me with trauma that I'm still processing. But then I think about that moment in Richard's office, that feeling of powerlessness, of being treated like a thing rather than a person. And I couldn't have lived with myself if I'd just walked away. The money helped. I won't pretend it didn't. That $125,000 gave me breathing room and security I never had before. But more than that, it was about refusing to be silenced, refusing to let Richard Morrison get away with treating women like commodities he cold trade for favors. It was about standing up and saying no, even when saying no could cost me everything. I tell Emma a simplified version of what happened, age-appropriate but honest. I tell her that someone in power tried to take advantage of me, and I fought back. I tell her that fighting back isn't always easy or fun or rewarding, but sometimes it's necessary. I tell her that money and security are important, but not as important as self-respect and integrity. I hope she remembers these lessons when she's older, when she inevitably faces her own Richards in whatever career she chooses. The biggest lesson I learned from all of this is that the system isn't designed to protect people like me. HR departments exist to protect the company, not employees. Harassment policies are only as good as the people enforcing them. And powerful men will keep doing this as long as they believe they can get away with it, as long as the cost of their behavior is less than the benefit they get from it. But I also learned that we're not completely powerless. Documentation matters, evidence matters, solidarity matters. Brenda's decision to help me, despite the risk to herself, made all the difference. If every woman who gets harassed had a Brenda willing to stand up and provide evidence, maybe things would change. But that's asking a lot of people who are just trying to survive, just trying to keep their jobs and health insurance and roofs over their heads. 5 years later, I still Google Richard's name sometimes, checking to see if anyone else has accused him, if he's finally faced consequences beyond losing one job. So far, nothing. He's rebuilt his reputation, moved on, probably tells people that crazy woman made up lies about him, and he was the real victim. It makes me angry, but I've learned to channel that anger into something productive. I volunteer with a nonprofit that helps women navigate workplace harassment cases. I share my story, not with identifying details because of the NDA, but enough that they know I've been there, I understand, I survived it. I help them find lawyers, prepare for depositions, deal with the emotional aftermath. It's the best thing I've done with my experience, turning my trauma into something that might help someone else avoid or endure their own nightmare. Emma's 14 now, starting high school, thinking about her future. She wants to be a lawyer, specifically an employment lawyer. She says she wants to help people like I help myself, wants to fight for people who can't fight for themselves. I don't know if that's really what she'll do, or if it's teenage idealism that'll fade when she realizes how hard and messy that work is. But I'm proud of her either way. Proud that she grew up seeing her mom refuse to back down, refuse to be silenced. Looking back at that Tuesday morning when Richard made his proposal, I sometimes think about parallel universes. In one universe, I said yes, took his disgusting deal, got the raise, and hated myself a little more every day. In another, I said nothing, quietly found a new job, and spent the rest of my life wondering what would have happened if I'd spoken up. In this universe, I said no and I fought, and while it cost me a lot, I can look at myself in the mirror without flinching. Was it worth it? Ask me on different days, and you'll get different answers. On good days, when I'm feeling strong and righteous, absolutely yes. It was worth every sleepless night, every panic attack, every moment of doubt. I stood up to a predator and won, even if winning looked messier and less satisfying than I'd imagined. On bad days, when the PTSD hits, and I'm remembering how scared I was, how close I came to losing everything, I'm not so sure. Maybe I should have been more strategic, more careful, less willing to burn everything down, but most days I land somewhere in the middle. It was worth it because it had to be worth it. Because the alternative was accepting that Richard Morrison could proposition his employees with no consequences, that the next woman in his office would face the same choice, that the system would continue protecting powerful men at the expense of everyone else. I disrupted that cycle. Even temporarily, even at great personal cost. The thing nobody tells you about fighting back is how lonely it gets. Even people who support you, who believe you, who think you did the right thing, they get tired of hearing about it. They want you to move on, to heal, to be the person you were before, but you can't go back to who you were before. That person didn't know what she knows now. That person still believed the system worked, that doing good work and keeping your head down would eventually pay off, that merit mattered more than politics and power, that I lost friends over this. People I thought would stand by me got uncomfortable when I talked about the lawsuit. Some of them worked in corporate environments and worried about their own positions if they were seen supporting me too publicly. Others just didn't want the drama, didn't want to pick sides, wanted everything to go back to normal. A few even suggested I'd been asking for it somehow, that I must have done something to give Richard the wrong idea. That hurt more than anything Richard had done, but I made new friends too. Women who reached out after seeing the news stories, who had their own stories of harassment and retaliation, who understood the unique trauma of being propositioned by someone with power over your livelihood. We formed this weird little support group, meeting for coffee or wine, sharing our experiences, helping each other through the bad days. These women saved me in ways I can't fully articulate. They made me feel less alone, less crazy, less damaged. Point one of them, a woman named Rachel who'd gone through something similar at a tech company, gave me advice that stuck with them. She said that winning isn't always about the money or the settlement or getting the guy fired. Sometimes winning is just surviving. Sometimes winning is refusing to let them break you, refusing to internalize their version of events, refusing to believe you deserved what happened. By that definition, I won every single day I woke up and kept going. The nightmares took about 2 years to stop. I'd dream about being back in Richard's office, but in the dream I couldn't move or speak, couldn't say no, couldn't leave. I'd wake up sweating, heart pounding, having to remind myself that it was over, that it couldn't hurt me anymore. Emma would sometimes hear me and come into my room, climb into bed with me, like she used to do when she was little and had bad dreams. The role reversal killed me. I was supposed to be the one comforting her, protecting her from nightmares, not the other way around. Therapy helped, but progress was slow. My therapist explained that trauma lives in your body, not just your mind, that you have to retrain your nervous system to understand that the threat is gone. We did EMDR, this weird therapy where you move your areas back and forth while processing traumatic memories. It sounds crazy, but it actually worked. Slowly, the nightmares faded, the constant hypervigilance eased up. I stopped jumping every time a man walked up behind me. Dating was complicated, maybe impossible. How do you explain to someone new that you have massive trust issues with men in authority? That you'll need them to be patient while you work through your trauma? That sometimes you'll have panic attacks for no apparent reason because something triggered a memory? I tried a few times, went on dates with guys who seemed nice enough, but I couldn't make myself vulnerable enough to let anything develop. Maybe someday. Or maybe I'm just done with romantic relationships for a while, focusing on myself and Emma instead. Work became my safe space, weirdly enough. My new job at Hartley Marketing was everything Morrison and Associates wasn't. The CEO was a woman who'd built the company from scratch and had zero tolerance for harassment or discrimination. We had anonymous reporting systems, regular trainings that weren't just check-the-box exercises, and a culture where speaking up was encouraged rather than punished. It sounds basic, but after what I'd been through, it felt revolutionary that I thrived there. Within 2 years, I was promoted to senior account manager, then to director. My salary exceeded what I'd been making at Morrison, and I earned it through actual merit, not because I played politics or made compromises. Every promotion felt like vindication, proof that I'd been good enough all along, that Richard had been wrong about me needing his patronage to succeed. But success didn't erase what happened. I still carried it with me, this weight of experience that colored how I saw everything. When I interviewed candidates, especially young women, I looked for signs they'd be safe on my team, that they'd feel empowered to speak up if something went wrong. When I dealt with difficult clients, I set boundaries early and firmly, refusing to tolerate inappropriate behavior, even if it meant losing the account. My boss noticed and appreciated it, said it set a good example for the team, that I became the person people came to when they had problems. Junior employees would ask to talk privately and tell me about uncomfortable situations with clients or colleagues. I'd listen, validate their feelings, help them figure out what to do. Sometimes it was just a misunderstanding that could be cleared up with communication. Sometimes it was actual harassment that needed to be reported. Either way, I made sure they knew they'd be supported, that speaking up wouldn't cost them their careers the way it almost cost me mine. One day, about 3 years after the settlement, I got a LinkedIn message from someone I didn't know. She worked at Morrison & Associates, had started there after everything went down with Richard. She said she'd heard stories about me from older employees, pieced together what had happened, and wanted to thank me. She said the culture had actually improved after the lawsuit, that the new policies were taken seriously, that women felt safer than they had before. She said I'd made a difference even though I'd never see most of the results. I cried reading that message. I'd spent so long wondering if any of it had mattered, if the settlement money was just the company's way of buying silence while changing nothing substantial. But here was evidence that something had shifted, that my fight hadn't been completely futile. It didn't erase the trauma or make what I'd been through worthwhile in some cosmic justice sense. But it felt. It helped a lot. Richard's name came up occasionally over the years. I heard through the industry grapevine that he'd moved to Portland, was consulting for startups, was still charismatic and well-connected. Part of me wanted to warn every woman in Portland's tech scene about him, put up billboards with his face and a warning label. But the NDA prevented that, and even without the NDA, people didn't like whistleblowers. They tend to blame the person who brings bad news rather than the person who did bad things. That I did what I could within legal limits. When women in my industry asked me about him, said they were considering working with him, I'd carefully suggest they do thorough reference checks, talk to women who'd worked with him previously, trust their instincts if something felt off. I couldn't be explicit, but I could drop enough hints that smart women would look deeper before getting involved with him. Maybe I saved someone. Maybe I didn't. I'll never know. Emma started dating when she turned 15, and I became the most paranoid mother in history. I grilled her boyfriends, probably embarrassed her constantly, made sure she understood concepts like consent and boundaries and red flags. She rolled her eyes and told me I was being overprotective, which was fair. But I couldn't help it. Knowing what I knew about how men could be, about how power corrupts, about how easily young women can be manipulated, I couldn't just relax and hope for the best. One night, she asked me directly about what had happened at my old job. She was 16, old enough to understand the full story. I told her everything, not holding back the way I had when she was younger. I told her about Richard's proposal, about HR's failure, about the lawsuit, about the nightmares and the trauma, and the slow process of healing. She listened quietly, and when I finished, she hugged me and said she was proud of me. Then she asked if I'd do it again, knowing how hard it would be, that I thought about it for a long time before answering. Would I? Knowing the cost, the pain, the years of therapy and sleepless nights and damaged relationships? Knowing the settlement would be less than I'd hoped, and the NDA would prevent me from telling my full story? Knowing Richard would face minimal consequences and probably do it again to someone else? I finally told her yes, I'd do it again, because the alternative was living with myself knowing I'd stayed silent. Some things are more expensive than money, more valuable than comfort. Integrity is one of them. The 7th anniversary of that Tuesday morning when Richard made his proposal, I took myself out to lunch. Fancy place, expensive wine, dessert I didn't need, but ordered anyway. It was my way of celebrating survival, of marking how far I'd come. 7 years ago, I'd been making $58,000 and considering whether to sleep with my boss for a raise. Now I was making 6 figures, had a healthy savings account, was respected in my industry, and slept soundly most nights. 7 years ago, I'd felt powerless. Now I felt strong. But I also felt sad for the version of me that had walked into Richard's office that day, naive and hopeful, thinking she was finally getting the recognition she deserved. I wished I could go back and warn her, prepare her, tell her it would be okay eventually. But that version of me had to go through what she went through to become who I am now. The trauma shaped me, for better and worse. It made me stronger and more brittle, more empathetic and more cynical, more courageous and more cautious. People sometimes ask me if I have any regrets. The honest answer is yes, lots of them. I regret not looking for a new job sooner, before things escalated with Richard. I regret not documenting everything from the beginning, not trusting my instincts when I first felt uncomfortable around him. I regret believing HR would help, that the system would work the way it was supposed to. I regret the friendships I lost, the time I spent angry and scared, the ways my trauma affected Emma, but I don't regret fighting back. I don't regret saying no to Richard's proposal, don't regret filing a lawsuit, don't regret seeing it through even when it would have been easier to settle early for less money and move on. Fighting back was the hardest thing I've ever done, and it broke something in me that never fully healed. But staying silent would have broken something worse, something essential to who I am. The thing about workplace harassment is that it's designed to be isolating. The perpetrator picks victims who are vulnerable, who need the job, who won't have the resources or support to fight back. They rely on shame and fear and economic desperation to keep people quiet. They bank on the fact that most people will choose survival over justice, will take the path of least resistance, will convince themselves it wasn't that bad or that they somehow deserved it. And most of the time, they're right. Most people do stay quiet. Most complaints go nowhere. Most harassers face no consequences and move on to their next victim. The system isn't broken, it's working exactly as designed, protecting the people with power while sacrificing the people without it. My case was unusual only because I had evidence, because Brenda risked everything to help me, because I had enough savings to survive a few months without income, because my lawyer was willing to work on contingency. How many women don't have those advantages? How many stay silent because they can't afford to fight, can't risk losing their jobs, can't face the public scrutiny and character assassination that comes with speaking up? How many swallow their pride and accept the harassment as the price of keeping a roof over their heads and food on the table? The answer is most of them. Most women in my situation would have had to either accept Richard's proposal or quietly find a new job while he moved on to his next target. That's the part that keeps me up at night. Not what happened to me, but what's happening to everyone else right now, today, in offices across the country. The women sitting in meetings with men who make inappropriate comments. The women enduring unwanted touching from supervisors. The women being propositioned with the implicit threat that refusing will cost them their careers. The women who can't afford to fight back, who don't have Brendas to help them, who don't have evidence or resources or support. I think about them when I'm having bad days, when the PTSD flares up and I'm questioning whether fighting back was worth it. I think about the message I sent by refusing to stay silent, by forcing Morrison and associates to acknowledge what Richard had done, by making his behavior cost them money and reputation and clients. Maybe it prevented him from doing it again, or at least made him more cautious. Maybe it encouraged other women to speak up. Maybe it accomplished nothing beyond my own sense of justice. I'll never know for sure. What I do know is that I can look Emma in the eye. I can tell her honestly that when someone with power tried to exploit me, I fought back as hard as I could. I didn't win completely, didn't get everything I wanted, didn't see Richard face criminal consequences or have his reputation fully destroyed. But I didn't lose either. I survived, I healed, I rebuilt my career, and I proved to myself that I have more strength than I'd ever imagined. These days, I tell my story whenever I can, within the limits of the NDA. I speak at women's professional organizations, mentor young women entering the workforce, volunteer with legal aid organizations that help harassment victims. I can't name names or share specific details, but I can describe the pattern, explain what to look for, teach people how to protect themselves and what to do if protection fails. Some people think I'm too focused on the past, that I should move on and stop defining myself by what happened with Richard. Maybe they're right. Maybe I'd be happier if I could just forget about it and focus on the present. But forgetting feels like betraying all the women who are going through their own versions of what I went through. Forgetting feels like letting Richard win, like accepting that what he did wasn't that important, wasn't worth the fight. I remember. I carry the weight of it, the trauma and the triumph, the fear and the courage, the moments of despair and the moments of victory. I let it inform how I treat people, how I run my team, how I raise my daughter. I let it make me harder in some ways and softer in others, more skeptical of authority and more committed to using whatever authority I have responsibly. Emma's applying to colleges now, looking at pre-law programs. She wants to specialize in employment law, wants to be the Kindoff lawyer who helps people like I needed help. I'm terrified for her because I know how hard that work is, how much trauma she'll witness, how many cases she'll lose because the system is rigged against victims. But I'm also incredibly proud. She's choosing to enter the fight with her eyes open, knowing the costs, believing it's worth it anyway. Maybe that's my real legacy from all of this. Not the settlement money, not the policy changes at Morrison and Associates, not even my own healing journey. Maybe it's raising a daughter who saw her mother refuse to be silenced and decided to spend her life amplifying other people's voices. Maybe it's showing one person that fighting back is possible, that the system can be challenged even if it can't always be beaten, that integrity matters more than comfort. And on the 10th anniversary of that Tuesday morning, I plan to do something I've thought about for years. I'm going to write a book, a memoir about workplace harassment and the broken systems that enable it. The NDA will have expired by then, and I'll finally be able to tell the whole story, names and details and everything. Maybe it'll help someone. Maybe it'll change nothing. But at least I'll have said my piece, put my truth out into the world, refused one final time to let Richard Morrison and men like him have the last word. Until then, I keep going. I do my job, raise my daughter, help other women when I can, and work on healing the parts of me that are still broken. Some days are harder than others. Some days I still feel that gut punch of fear when a male colleague asks to meet with me privately. Some days I'm angry all over again at Richard, at HR, at everyone who enabled him or looked the way. Some days I'm tired of being strong, tired of being the woman who fought back, tired of carrying this story, but most days, I'm okay. Most days, I'm even good. I have a career I'm proud of, a daughter I adore, friends who understand, and the knowledge that I did everything I could with the hand I was dealt. I said no when it would have been easier to say yes. I fought when it would have been safer to flee. I spoke up when it would have been more comfortable to stay silent. And while the victories were smaller and more complicated than I'd hoped, while the costs were higher than I'd imagined, I'd still make the same choice. Because at the end of the day, you have to live with yourself. You have to look in the mirror and recognize the person staring back. You have to know, deep in your bones, that you didn't betray yourself for money or security or the approval of people who should never have had power over you in the first place. I know those things. I earned them through fire and tears and years off therapy. And that knowledge, that bone-deep certainty that I stood up for myself when it mattered most, is worth more than any raise Richard Morrison could ever have offered. Oh yeah, that's my story. That's what happened when my boss made me an immoral proposal for a $15,000 raise. He thought he could buy my dignity, my self-respect, my body. He thought I was desperate enough and powerless enough to accept his terms. He was wrong. And while proving him wrong cost me more than I ever wanted to pay, I'd pay it again tomorrow if I had to. Some prices are worth paying. Some fights are worth having. Some words are worth saying, even when saying them burns your whole world down. And if you're reading this, if you're in a similar situation, wondering if you should speak up or stay silent, wondering if fighting back is worth the cost, I can't tell you what to do. Every situation is different. Every person has their own limits and resources and risks to consider. But I can tell you that silence has its own cost. Living with yourself knowing you accepted the unacceptable, that you let someone treat you as less than human, that cost compounds over time, eating away at you in ways you might not even recognize. Whatever you decide, I believe you. I support you. And I promise you're not alone. Even when it feels like you are. There are women like me, women like Brenda, women who've been through it and survived it, ready to help if you reach out. The system is broken and unfair and designed to protect the wrong people. But we're not completely powerless. Together, we're stronger than we are alone. And sometimes, just sometimes, fighting back works. That has to be enough. Because it's all we've got.